I will call the meeting, Planning Commission, to order. First item is roll call.
Commissioner Lively?
Here.
Commissioner Whitmer?
Here.
Chair Christensen?
Here.
Commissioner Lane?
Here.
And I have word from Commissioner Tonelli that he'll be a few minutes late.
With Commissioner Tonelli being late, I will reorder the agenda so that he is here for what I think most of you are here for, is the DEIR on Carton Field and also the election of new officers of the commission. So let's move on to item number 2, the approval of minutes. Well, here he is.
Wow.
We don't have
That
it.
was amazing.
Timing you made.
It's good when you rented that helicopter.
Sorry. We have an approval, or a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting of the 25th September.
I'll move the minutes as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Have to abstain, wasn't there?
You were quoted very well, though.
Okay. Public comments is item number 3 on the agenda. This is the time for someone in the audience to speak on an item that is not on the agenda. Time is limited to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody wanting to take advantage of this? If not, I will move on to Commissioner reports.
I have one.
Okay?
Paul and I are members of the this community center task force advisory committee, and they are having, along with the consultants, having a series of 6 meetings in the neighborhoods to acquaint everybody with the current progress of the design for the master plan town area. The locations are Patricia Drive on number 1, Alejandro is number 2, Mountain Vernon is number 3, Walsh Road is 4, 173 Hawthorne and Linwood is 5, and Acacia, 96 Acacia is number 6. Reservations are open, and we hope that planning commissioners and members of the audience will find time to attend one of those meetings. Reservations are available through the town. Just give them a call and they'll tell you which ones are open and where you can go. So please find time to go to these meetings. They're all in the next couple of weeks.
Anyone else with a report? I'd like to make a report on our subcommittee on heritage trees. We've met twice and discussed various changes in the ordinance. Those changes include eliminating, of course, the eucalyptus from the protected tree category, as well as the Monterey pine. We're seeking a definition now for younger, in effect, younger palms that don't have a historic value can be eliminated from the protection of the heritage tree ordinance. We're looking at some standards of care, trimming, and so forth to be added to the ordinance. We're also considering that on landscape screening, that if part of that landscape screening between neighbors dies, the neighbor whose property the landscape screen is on must replace the particular tree or bush to keep the landscape screen in effect. There are other changes that we're discussing, and we will continue to meet. Our next meeting is going to be Thursday next week, 3:30. And that committee, in case you've forgotten, is Mary Beth and I are meeting with Andrea and Kevin Kelsey, the town arborist. Yes. Oh, you were so interested.
Soaking it all in.
All right. Any other reports, Frank, or questions on
It was 2 weeks.
it? Yes. Next week, not tomorrow.
Yeah.
Excuse me. You gonna show up tomorrow?
No.
I won't. Staff reports.
I don't have any reports.
Okay. The first item on new business is the selection of the planning commissioner chair and vice chair. This normally takes place in June or July, since I think our terms end on June 30th, I believe. But we didn't have a full complement until Paul arrived, so they are being held tonight. Do we have any
Mr.
nominations?
Chairman, I would like to nominate you to continue as chairman of the planning commission. It's such a marvelous job. I think you ought to just stick with it, boss.
That was what's called a preemptive strike.
Yeah, but not true. Okay, are there any other nominations then?
Second.
Okay. All right, all those in favor?
I
Aye.
The
You
vice-
accept the nomination?
Well, reluctantly.
All right, good.
Thank you. The vice chair, nominations for vice chair. I'd like to nominate Phil with reciprocal.
Second?
Okay, are any others? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. Our vice chair is continues as Phil Lively. We'll move on then to number 7. Resolution initiating an amendment to the Atherton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.4, Athletic Court Regulations. Staff?
Thank you. This item was discussed at your last meeting at the request of an Atherton resident to make some adjustments to our athletic court regulations. The specific concern was relating to a dirt bike track in somebody's backyard. So the process to make changes to our zoning code is either staff brings it forward as a code amendment. The planning commission can, by resolution, initiate an amendment to the code, or the city council can direct an amendment to the code. So the process we're following this evening is for planning commission to initiate via a resolution. If you so adopt that resolution, then staff would do some research. We've started the research of other jurisdictions and really haven't found much applicability here. I think this is something very unique, as Atherton is in many ways. So we'll probably need to work on some unique language that would be appropriate for Atherton for the athletic court regulations. As we do that, I would appreciate any direction you have as far as the scope of what you would like reviewed. Certainly the first item would be the concern addressed by the neighbor on the dirt track. I think another item we mentioned was possible batting cages. If there's anything else that you're aware of that you would like us to research, please let me know. We can also, based on our knowledge and what's been applied for and reviewed in town, can provide some other suggestions. Happy to answer any questions.
I have one comment. While the dirt track or bike might be one thing, what about people who might choose to leave the spoils from the basement on their property and mount it up to 12 or 13 feet, just so they can go up there and reach king of the hill in the neighborhood?
Yeah, we do have a maximum height for retaining walls, and we tried to address that issue, but mounting it, they would need to certainly submit a plan, engineering to make sure it's safe, but you're right, we don't have any regulations on that.
Might look at that as well.
Okay. That would be separate from athletic courts.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it might.
You might fall in.
You can ride a bike up on top of it.
Right. A difficult putting green.
Yeah. Just a thought.
Thank you.
The other thing to consider is, we were talking about bikes, but also someone could even think about just converting an empty pool into a skateboard park. So I would put that on the marquee too. That's going to create noise and nuisance.
Anything else? Lisa? Okay.
So you want a motion on that?
Yes, I'd like a motion on that.
I move that the planning commission adopt a resolution to amend the Atherton Municipal Code, Chapter 17.4, regulating athletic facilities.
I'll second.
Do we have any discussion on that? If not, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All against? The resolution passes. Okay, we'll move on to the item that I think most of you are here for, and that's the draft environmental impact report for Carton Field.
Okay, before you start, I need to leave, as my husband is on the town council, and this issue is starting to come in front of him. I'm going to excuse myself from this issue.
Well, I appreciate your doing it on the suggestion of the town attorney, not suggestion, but order. I disagree with the town attorney on this, but I don't think tonight is the way to discuss it, so.
All right. Let me know when you're ready for the next issue.
Did you bring your big book?
Yeah.
Tonight, we are going to give the EIR authors areas that we feel have not been adequately covered in the draft EIR. I'm sure that's what most of you are here for, and we'll start out by the staff report. Then the EIR authors will speak, and finally, the representative of Menlo will discuss in summary fashion some of the things that they're going to be doing on the field. Then I will open up the meeting to public comments. Those public comments are going to be limited to a maximum of 10 minutes apiece. The idea there is we're here to try to clarify, explain any parts of the EIR that we feel are missing. We're not here to either criticize the plan itself. This is for the draft EIR for questions for the authors to respond to. So, staff?
Thank you.
Lisa?
The application before you, as you indicated, is the public comment period and review of the draft environmental impact report. We have an application from Menlo School and Menlo College for a conditional use permit as well as a noise ordinance amendment to allow renovation of the Carton Athletic Field, and that's located at the corner of El Camino and Alejandra. In evaluating this project, staff felt the appropriate environmental analysis pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act would be the preparation of an environmental impact report. The town has retained the services of Lamphere Gregory with Rebecca Gordon as the project manager to prepare the EIR. Rebecca will provide an overview of CEQA regulations for you, as well as review the draft EIR and the findings. As indicated, following her presentation, Menlo School and College will provide a brief overview of the project. And actually, before we turn over to Rebecca, we also have some comments from the Assistant City Attorney on the scope of the review tonight.
Oh, good.
We previously conducted a scoping meeting, and the purpose of that was to get input on the scope of the EIR, and that was attended by adjacent residents of the project. And as I indicated, the meeting tonight is to receive comments, questions, and any requests for additional information or analysis in the environmental impact report. The deadline to comment is October 28th. It's a 45-day review period. And we've sent notice to the adjacent property owners within 500 feet and any other interested individual as well as adjacent agency. To date, we've received comments from Richard Thiesing, Steve and Ann Engelhardt, sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Howard Ellman, representative for a property owner, Mr. and Mrs. King, Mr. and Mrs. Getty, John Johnson, Mrs. Menlo Park Fire, and Mike Greenberg. And as I indicated, we could receive additional letters up till close of business on October 28th. So if so directed by the Planning Commission, Lampier Gregory will provide a written response to all comments that have received either at this hearing tonight or in written fashion prior to October 28th. Those comments and any additional analysis that's required will come back to you in the form of a final environmental impact report. So it'll be the draft environmental impact report, any additional information, and a response to all those comments. All that would come back to you. At this point, we have anticipated that for January, but depending on how much analysis is needed, it may take a little more time. So it's just tentatively scheduled at this point. The process from there is a recommendation of the Planning Commission up to the City Council. The City Council would be the body that would actually certify the environmental impact report as being a complete document in compliance with CEQA. Following that, we have tentatively scheduled March of next year for your consideration of the conditional use permit and the recommendation of an ordinance amendment for the actual improvements to Carton Field. So that concludes my comments, and Jennifer.
Well, I think CEQA can be a little confusing, so we thought it might be helpful just to explain so everybody's on the same page what the purpose is tonight. Tonight, what we're talking about is the draft EIR, which we all have in front of us. The discussion of the actual project, what people think is a good idea, not a good idea, is at a later time. So, if this helps. The draft EIR is subject to public comment review, but it's limited in purpose and scope. Anyone can comment on the draft EIR, and as Lisa already explained, can come in writing, orally, or by email. I know we have a limit of 10 minutes tonight, but if you run afoul of the 10 minutes, you are in no way prevented from going home, writing up an email that says everything you want to say, as long as you want, and get that in. You are not limited. It's just the 10 minutes orally tonight. Again, the deadline is October 28th. The focus of the comments, any of the comments, is set out in the CEQA guidelines at 14 California Code of Regulations, sections 15,200 and following, in case you want to go home and look it up. The comments should focus on the sufficiency of the document in identifying and analyzing possible impacts on the environment and ways in which the project's significant effects might be avoided or mitigated, especially specific alternatives or mitigation measures. Comments should be directed at the draft EIR treatment of potential impacts, not past enforcement deficiencies or issues. CEQA requires that the EIR be a study of the potentially significant environmental impacts that come from the proposed project. Historical issues may be problems in and of themselves, but they aren't looked at through CEQA as a rule unless they contribute to the impacts associated with the project. The purpose tonight is only to discuss issues related to whether or not the draft EIR adequately identifies and discusses the potential significant environmental issues created by the proposed project and any mitigations that may lessen or remove such impacts. Any issues regarding past problems or enforcement should be addressed separately through appropriate town channels such as code enforcement or planning. And we're not trying to be, just trying to make it clearer. And it's really important that we have a great record on all of these things, so if we can limit the scope of what we're talking about, I think that will just make a better document for everybody. Hopefully that helps.
Okay. And Rebecca Gordon from Lampier Gregory.
As she mentioned, my name is Rebecca Gordon. I'm with a company called Lampier Gregory. We're the primary report repairers for the Environmental Impact Report, called EIR for short. I'm going to talk briefly about CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, its purpose and process in this particular case.
Director comments to the commission.
Oh,
I know it's an
Is
attractive
this-
audience.
Is this on?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then go through a summary of the analysis conclusions and alternatives in the environmental impact report. So the purpose of CEQA basically are to inform governmental decision makers and the public about potential significant environmental impacts of proposed activities. And then identify the ways that that environmental damage can be avoided or significantly reduced, and prevent those significant avoidable damage to the environment by requiring changes in the project through the use of feasible alternatives or mitigation measures. So the process for this particular project began with circulation of a notice of preparation in January 2013, which was attached to an initial study that assessed the various environmental topic areas and determined which had the potential for impact with this project. We collected comments on that as well as during the scoping meeting, and then went and performed numerous technical analyses and rolled those into the draft EIR. We're currently in the circulation period for this draft EIR. It's a 45-day period, and any comments that we collect, either written or verbally tonight, we will respond to formally in a document called a final EIR. And following completion of the final EIR, as was mentioned already, those responses to the comments as well as the draft EIR will go before the Planning Commission and the City Council for consideration of certification under CEQA. Project approvals occur as a parallel process and separately, and could only occur once certification of the EIR occurs. So summarizing the EIR, I want to go through the analysis that was performed in our conclusions first. I'm going to go through in the same order that these were in the draft EIR, which was alphabetical. So starting with aesthetics, we brought in a visual modeler, brought her out to the site, had her take a series of photographs from various off-site viewpoints, and create digital models of what the views towards the site would look like once the project was completed. From that analysis, we determined that the site was largely screened from off-site view, and changes were found not to meet environmental thresholds, which are substantial degradation of the visual character on the site. It should also be noted that there's no floodlighting of the fields proposed, no nighttime use of those fields. So moving to air then, we performed modeling of the air quality emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, and the potential for health impacts related to construction activities required to perform the project. We found the levels to be well below the threshold levels, though regardless, the air district's best management practices would be applied to construction activities at the site to reduce any dust or exhaust emissions. We had a biologist and an arborist assess the site and plans and determine that there are limited biological resources at the site, which makes sense since it's already developed. It would require surveying and protection of any nesting birds that are there during the construction period. And we also made recommendations that would increase tree survival and the health of the screening trees around the site during and after the construction period. We had a group of historical and archaeological experts perform field surveys, historic assessments, research, and record searches. They found that there's an old stable on the site that is potentially a historic resource due to its connection with the racehorse Farlap and his contentious death in 1932. The loss of this structure, even with creation of a memorial, would represent a significant environmental impact. Retention of this structure to avoid this impact is included in the alternatives, which I'll discuss after this. There are no known buried resources at the site. However, because archaeological resources have been discovered on similar sites in the area, we've included mitigation that would require exploration by qualified professional archaeologists prior to the construction activities and the training of the construction crew in case there's anything that was missed. We had acoustical engineers monitor ambient noise levels at and around the site, and they performed noise modeling of future levels based on athletic noise source measurements taken at the site, at other locations at Menlo School and College, as well as based on athletic noise source measurements taken from their files from 8 other athletic facilities around the Bay Area.
You're gonna do the greenhouse gas emissions also? At least get that.
We did greenhouse gas emissions with air quality.
Okay.
Yeah, I talked about it then.
Okay.
And it was all below threshold levels. So in any case, so this noise modeling, we modeled existing and future noise levels. They're presented in a discussion by use as well as in table format. There's various ways to consider noise data, including maximum noise levels, average noise levels, and annualized noise levels. These are all included in the draft DIR. I'm not going to attempt to verbally go over all of it. But to simplify the results and the conclusions, the proposed aquatic center would generate new noise because it's not currently at the Carton Field site. It is at a level that is allowed under the existing and proposed noise ordinance regulations. It is subterranean, so the noise would largely be held into the site due to those features. So for the majority of activities that will continue at the site, so they're already there and they'll continue, the noise levels at the adjacent residences will be similar or reduced from existing levels. They'll not meet threshold levels for increased noise impacts. The exception is that the project would result in noticeably increased noise levels from games at the football, soccer, and lacrosse fields at the 3 residential properties at the northern boundary of the project site. This is due to the fields and the grandstands actually moving closer to those residences, and the grandstands having increased height from that existing. Our noise modelers proposed various mitigation, including a noise barrier, an appropriately designed PA system, and a constrained grandstand seating during smaller events so that spectators wouldn't sit near that area if they didn't need to. However, the noise increase, while somewhat reduced, would remain significant. Again, there's alternative site plans that could reduce this, which I'll talk about in a moment. So traffic. We had traffic engineers at Crane Transportation Group complete a traffic analysis and a parking study to assess the potential impacts of the project. This included counts and assessment of a large Saturday afternoon Menlo College football game, as that's the activity on the site with the highest vehicle draw. They also assessed the potential bear impacts during weekday peak hours, as that's when there's the most vehicles on the transportation system. The project would result in some increase in vehicle volumes, as well as changes to circulation due to the movement of some of the activities from other locations on the college and school to the Carton Field site, and the addition of a second driveway from the parking lot on El Camino Real. So this analysis concluded that the project would not degrade operation of any intersection below acceptable level of service standards, would not contribute significantly to intersections that would otherwise operate below those level of service standards, nor would it trigger any signal warrant criteria levels for unsignalized intersections. This is a conclusion for both weekdays and Saturdays, as well as under existing conditions and anticipated cumulative future conditions. The analysis did identify vehicle queuing increases beyond turn lane storage capacity on northbound El Camino Real and Alejandra Avenue and Isabella Avenue during the big Saturday games. This impact would be mitigated through extension of a turn lane into Isabella Avenue and by limiting the El Camino Real driveway to right turn exits only, with no left turns or entry allowed at this point. The analysis concluded that this would mitigate those 2 impacts and there would be no remaining significant impacts following this mitigation. The project could also exacerbate an existing problem of pedestrians choosing to walk in the roadway instead of along the sidewalk parallel to Alejandra Avenue between Wonderlic Fields and Carton Field. New fencing or barrier landscaping as well as wayfinding signage is included as mitigation for this potential impact. As I mentioned, parking was also assessed. Though as noted in the document, inconveniences related to searching for parking would be considered social rather than environmental impacts. However, we did analyze the possibility for secondary environmental impacts resulting from cars that are circling or otherwise causing other environmental impacts. The parking analysis concluded that although parking demand can exceed supply during large games, the project would increase parking provisions more than it would increase demand for parking and would simplify circulation by providing a second point of egress from the lot. It was concluded that these parking issues would not rise to the level of an environmental impact. So that's the summary of the analysis and conclusions. We also looked at alternatives to see if we could further reduce any of those impacts or avoid the two significant impacts that we found. To remind you, those two significant impacts were removal of the stable that's potentially a historic resource and a noise impact from the football, lacrosse, and soccer fields on residents to the north. As required under CEQA, the alternatives focused on these significant impacts. 3 alternatives were evaluated. The first, again, as required, was a no project alternative. What would happen if no project was approved? The site would remain largely as it is today. There would be no new environmental impacts. We considered a stable retention alternative that would result in the same impacts of the project, except that the potentially historic stable would be retained, and therefore that significant impact avoided. We also looked at a relocated football field alternative. It swaps the location of the football field with the tennis courts and aquatic center to lower the noise levels at those residences to the north that were significantly affected by the project. Noise levels were fully modeled for this alternative, with the conclusion that future noise levels of existing uses would be expected to be similar or reduced from both the existing condition or that proposed under the project. All projected future noise levels would be within levels allowable under the proposed noise ordinance amendment. This alternative would also retain the potentially historic stable and would not substantially change the other impacts identified under the project. We did have the traffic engineer also take a look at this alternative, and he agreed that there would be no additional or worsened impacts from this alternative. It was determined that this relocated football field alternative would be environmentally superior to the project because it would reduce both significant impacts and all remaining impacts would be able to be mitigated to a level considered less than significant under CEQA. It is my understanding that project proponents would move forward with this alternative in place of the project. So in closing, this was just a summary of the analysis and conclusions in the EIR document, and they're included in full in that document and its appendices. As I mentioned previously, at this point we are collecting written and verbal comments on the environmental analysis, to which we will respond formally in the final EIR as part of the CEQA process. Thank you.
Any questions of that summary or not?
Do you want to ask her?
Ask her a couple of things about clarification. Is that appropriate? All right.
Go ahead.
All right, so just a couple things. On the noise aspect of the project, one of the things I was looking at is the activity schedule density relative to noise. Like, so does it have peaks or valleys? And if it does, how close are they together compared to current status? So if you have 9 different events scheduled, you know, back to back to back now because the density of the site is up, that changes the nature of the noise that we've had in that, and I didn't really specifically see that cited here.
Right. So I think the short answer is we can have our noise specialists respond much better formally in the EIR, but the short answer is that there's a lot of different ways to look at noise, and in a CEQA document we compare them to certain thresholds. So we looked at the maximum noise levels and also looked at the average noise levels. The average levels would take into account the density, as you mentioned, of the noise, so how often the different noises are occurring, whereas the maximum would be instantaneous noises that occur during various events.
Okay. All right, so just for what it's worth, a lot of the things I've looked at and incorporated is averages masked real data. So distribution is as more insightful than average. So something I'll come back to.
Sure.
See the thing. The other thing is a crossover on the crossover queuing impact. Talk about the crossover queuing impact on the left turn, but there isn't a discussion about the crossover or the queuing impact on the right turn off of El Camino, waiting for people to turn left and go, and then backing up along the road there, and the impact on the bike path because of that. So is there any description there that I'm missing, or is that something
Right.
that's worth
And again, we can have our traffic engineer respond formally, but I think the short answer is they assess the potential for queuing impacts at those steady intersections and only pointed out where they would be a problem.
Okay, so I would say that would be a problem that we would want to highlight. On the other alternatives, relative to that queuing issue, I didn't see anything that talked about the potential of relocating parking in another way. So, for example, noise mitigation by putting the parking up where the tennis courts are proposed now, because that would put parking up by the residents rather than tennis courts. So is there anything that was looked at in terms of that kind of mitigation too, or not?
Eric, I think this belongs, your questions really belong when we ask, information
Okay.
about the report,
I
if you
just-
don't mind.
That's fine with me. I just want to make sure that those would be the type of things that I would be looking for
Yeah,
in the report. So that was my
Right.
last comment. That was my last one.
you can bring it up again when we get,
All right. By the way, I've read a lot of these, and this is the first one that I read this long that I didn't fall asleep on, so it's well. Thank you.
all right.
Thank you. I'd just like to have Menlo School and Menlo College give a very brief overview of the proposed project.
I'm David McAdoo, Director of Operations and Construction for Menlo School, and I'm just going to speak characteristically on behalf of the school and the college this evening. And I just wanted to give a brief orientation to this project and to the site. This process really began several years ago, and once we got a good concept of how we wanted to fit things on the site, we reached out to the neighbors, and we have conducted and hosted 7